Well, we're using garden hoses to lay out our planting beds here. They're flexible, so they work real well on laying out these irregular areas. We want everything to look sort of random once it's all planted. At the same time, a lot of thought goes into exactly how we're doing this.
The nursery sent out these little rulers. They convert the 1/8-inch scale on the plan to feet, so it makes it easier to get our measurements. Like off the corner of this house, we want to get this curve here, so we take 3 measurements off the plan. We go 90 degrees off the corner of the house, and we get 11. Then we go 45 degrees, and we get 13. And another 90 degrees, and we get 9. Now we put stakes in at those points and loop the hose around to match this curve.
All right, how's this looking, do you think?
Good.
You all set there?
Yep.
Okay, well, now that we have all the beds laid out, we're going to cut our sod down to the topsoil. Now, Robin's been edging around the outside here with a square-nosed spade. So to cut out the sod, we're going to be using our sod kicker here. It has this little blade that goes down to the depth of the roots of the sod. So it's just a matter of getting this blade started and then kicking it along as you go.
Well, we've got all the beds laid out and cleared, and we're ready to install this plastic edging. Now, this isn't absolutely necessary, but it makes a good barrier for keeping the grass from invading the beds.
It's made out of plastic with this round bead on the top that stays above the surface. This separates out the planting beds. And this web here, the bottom portion, let me get this up here, this web portion gets buried under the ground. And these grooves tend to anchor the edging in the ground since the edging has a tendency to work itself out of the ground during winter frost heaves.
Sometimes this edging can be a little stiff or twisty if it comes in a coil. So you might want to lay it out in the sun for a few minutes until you're ready to work with it.
While the strips have been warming up out in the sun, I've been digging a trench here to bury the edging. I'm going down 6 inches, which should do a good job in accommodating the depth. Now, the depth of the edging itself will vary, with more expensive stuff going 4 to 6 inches into the ground. If your winters bring a lot of freezing weather, try to get the deepest edging available, because that resists heaving a lot better.
I've seen this edging come in strips 60 feet long, but these 20-footers are pretty common. Can you grab that for me?
Yeah, I got it here.
Okay, once it's manageable, you just put it into the trench with the bead the same height as the lawn.
Well, once we have the edging in the trench, it's a good idea to stake it in place. And we do that at each one of the ends and about every 10 feet or so. Then we can brush some of the dirt back in and cover up the bottom of the edging. Well, we got all of our edging in, and we were able to fill in sod over in this empty area with some of the sod that we took out right over here. And now's a real good time to make any amendments to the soil in terms of drainage or chemical composition. I'll tell you, with what we're working here, we're going to be fine.
Yeah, all we're doing is adding black dirt to build up the soil against the house and then slope it down away from the house. This keeps rainwater from pooling up against the foundation. With a big project like this, it's not a bad idea to have a couple yards of black dirt on hand.
If you're stuck with some miserable-looking topsoil, you can improve it by adding some black dirt to it, compost, or peat moss, which is what we're going to need here.
At this point, we're not figuring a lot of flowers, but in this bed, we're putting in a ground cover known as Pachysandra. Now, the nursery recommends that we first prepare the soil by mixing in about 4 inches of peat moss.
What it'll do is just keep the soil nice and loose so the roots of the ground cover can spread out real nicely and evenly.
We started planting our first bed by putting in the biggest shrub, a winged euonymus. You always want the largest shrubs in place first to establish their positions before setting the smaller ones around them. After that, we were ready for the bare root forsythia that we laid out as a hedge in that same bed.
If you've never planted bare root shrubs before, then pay close attention because they're different from planting any other form. First of all, you want to take a plant off the bundle, just one at a time, and then cover the rest back up so they don't dry out. And then before putting them in the hole, cut about a 1/4 inch off the end of each root. And this is to promote new growth.
You want the hole about 6 inches wider and 6 inches deeper than the roots themselves, so these holes aren't exactly going to be massive. You also want the crown of the plant, that's the area right where the roots start, to be right at the surface level.
Okay, that should do it. As soon as you get the right depth, you want to make a mound of dirt on the bottom of the hole for the root mass to sit on. Now, it should be high enough so that the crown is just above ground level, or 2 to 4 inches higher if you're planning on having mulch. How's that?
A stick laying across the hole will help you determine how high it should be. Okay, it looks pretty good there.
Then you fill the hole halfway with soil. Pour water over that to help it settle. These are going to need a lot of water the first week. And this is just the first drink.
Well, now's a good chance to reposition the plant and then bring in the rest of the soil and just place it nice and firmly up against the roots. And these are really the basic steps in planting bare root stock.
As a final step, they say it's essential to heavily prune the plant to help reduce the shock of replanting. They recommend cutting about 1/3 to 1/2 of all the branches off. But since this plant is going to be pruned as a hedge, we'll wait until they're all planted and then prune them all at the same time.
Well, the strange thing about bare root stock is you can compact so many plants together in one little area like this. In fact, we were talking to one of the guys at the nursery, and he was saying people will call up to order 3 plants. By the time they get into their house, they think they've got just 1 plant, and they'll end up sticking 3 of them into one hole.
Okay, we've moved ahead and got all the forsythia planted. What I'm doing now is trimming them off as recommended. You want your hedges to be wider on the bottom than they are at the top, slanted on both sides, so you cut them at an angle. This promotes leaf growth throughout the entire plant. It makes a nice full hedge. Now, it doesn't look like we're doing much because the plants are so small, but it's good to start training a hedge right off the bat.
Well, we're going to fill in our center area here with a perennial ground cover called Pachysandra. It doesn't take a lot of sun, which is good because it's not going to get much in this area. Now, the nice thing about these is planting them, it isn't quite as technical as the bare rootstock.
Now you're going to see more and more ground cover like this used in landscape. It's already popular in shady areas where grass doesn't grow well. It's also really low maintenance compared to grass.
Yeah, lawn can be a little bit of a hassle. Robin says there's all the mowing, and then you have to water and fertilize it. Although this is quite a bit more work up front than just rolling out a few rolls of sod. I think in the long run, this is definitely a lot less maintenance.
Now we're going to move on to the large bed in the front and show you how to plant trees that come from the nursery with their root balls wrapped in burlap.
We've heard a lot of different suggestions on how big to dig the hole for trees. Now, the nursery sent along these instructions, which should be pretty accurate because they guarantee their plants 100%. They recommend digging the hole 6 inches wider than the root ball. For the depth, they say that the top of the root ball should be 3 to 4 inches above ground level if you're adding mulch. If not, it should be just a little higher than ground level.
Now, you really don't want to eyeball these things. What you can do is take a board, lay that across the hole, and then measure down from it. Okay, what do we got here? 9.5. Yeah, the last thing you want to do is dig the hole, throw the ball in, and then find out that it isn't quite deep enough. It can be a little difficult to get back out. You want to help me muscle this thing in?
Oh, sure. Okay.
Just, oh boy, I have to get underneath that a little bit more.
Okay, here.
There we go. Boy, those spines are sharp,
Yeah,
aren't
here.
they?
Okay, here. Oh. Make sure it's straight. Does that look straight or
not
looks a
quite.
little crooked? burlap's biodegradable, so you can actually leave it on after planting, except on the top. You should pull it back there to expose the surface and fold the burlap down the sides. Otherwise, it'll wick moisture away from the ball.
Now you just start filling up the hole here with dirt about halfway up the root ball. At this point, you might be tempted to fertilize, but you don't want to do that on trees the first year. Fertilizer just encourages leaf growth. The first year on trees, you want to encourage root growth.
Regular fertilizers can also burn the roots, but there are slow-release fertilizers that work over a 3-year period. The nursery sells them in these packets, and they're developed by the University of Wisconsin, and you just throw them right into the planting hole. Now, that's if you're concerned about your soil's nutrients, but we're not. Ours is fine.
If you've got a heavy clay soil, some growers recommend mixing this backfill with peat moss to create kind of an intermediate zone for the roots to grow through between the good nursery soil and the hard clay. And usually, your existing soil is going to be just fine.
Once the hole is filled up halfway, you want to soak it real good with water. This packs down the soil and makes sure that the roots are getting adequate moisture. And to remove any air pockets, just jab the hose in and out of the soil around the root ball. It looks funny, but it'll help the roots.
Now at this point, if things are looking a little lopsided, you can do some adjustment, but actually this looks pretty good, so just fill in the rest of the dirt.
Well, now that we have the hole filled, we're forming a basin around the root ball with the extra soil. This will pool water over the root ball, which needs a lot of moisture the first week.
Well, once the basin's all set, then you can water it to soak the root ball real well. You don't have to worry about overwatering the first week. If anything, you have to worry about not getting enough moisture.
Well, now that you have an idea of how to plant a balled and burlap tree, we've got about 6 more to put in. So I'm going to go ahead and measure those, and then we can dig them.
After planting all the trees, we also did a little pruning to help them grow a bit better. It's not mandatory, but thinning out the branches means fewer leaves to support and more energy for the roots to establish themselves. Before digging any more holes, we did a test run on the next batch of shrubs by setting them in place as shown in the plan. This is a good idea on any landscape because you can see how the plants look together and you can correct any spacing mistakes. Once you're satisfied, mark the positions, pull the shrubs back, and start digging.
Okay, will you check that for me? That's a lot closer. The steps involved in planting a balled and burlap shrub are basically the same as what we told you yesterday for planting trees, starting with the hole being 6 inches wider than the ball.
And where the ball sits in the hole depends on whether or not you're going to mulch. In this area, we're going to be putting in 4 inches of mulch. So when everything's all said and done, we want the top of the mulch to be level with the top of the root ball.
How does that look?
Pretty good. Let me get my hair.
Is it raining too much?
Now we just pull this twine off and then peel back the burlap to expose the top like we did on the trees.
Okay, I can finish this. It's not really necessary to add fertilizer for shrubs either, but you could put in a slow-release fertilizer at this point. Now we just backfill it halfway, water it, finish backfilling it, and then form a basin on the top. Well, that's good enough. You don't have to spend that much time getting a perfect basin, believe me. So now I'm ready for some water.
We'll be pruning the shrubs just like we did the trees, but we'll wait until everything's in the ground. The next thing to go in now are these spirea. These are container grown, but digging the hole is the same as doing the balled and burlap. You want it 6 inches wider than the container, at a depth that leaves the surface of the root ball just a little higher than the finished surface of the bed.
The main difference with container plants is that you need to take the container off the root ball. For smaller plants like this, these 1 or 2 gallon that we have, place your hand on the root ball around the crown to support the plant. Tip it upside down and tap the sides of the container until it's loosened up. Take the container off the root ball Right, like that. But don't drop the root ball, you could damage it. These container-grown roots tend to grow in circles. So before planting, take a knife and make 4 or 5 vertical cuts like this to get the roots growing out again. Then it's ready to go in the hole.
Okay, we're all set.
Now, the rest is the same as for balled and burlap shrubs. Backfilling, watering, and building a basin for water above the root ball.
Well, be sure to check the moisture on these before you plant them. If they're too dry, when you flip them upside down, they could fall apart. In fact, it's a good idea the night before to take all your container-grown plants and water them so they're all set to go the next day. Now, these range in sizes from 1 to 7 gallons. Now, the larger ones, you're not going to be able to just flip upside down and hold on when they're going to be too big. So as an example, lay them on their side, tap the sides of the container, and then just slide the container off. About like that. Go ahead and cut the root ball. You're all ready to plant them. Well, we planted all of our shrubs yesterday. Now we just have a couple of things left to do. One is to cover all of our planting beds in 4 inches of hardwood bark mulch.
One of the main reasons for adding mulch is to discourage weed growth in between your trees and shrubs. With an organic mulch like this, you need to add a full 3 or 4 inches to stifle the weeds. Otherwise, they just keep popping back up without any trouble at all.
Now, one thing about organic mulch is that it does decompose over time, so you have to do a little replacing every now and again. Another option is rock mulch, but there you have to put some type of weed barrier underneath so the weeds aren't sprouting up through the rocks. And make sure you don't use plastic because then water can't get through to the plants. Instead, use something like landscape fabric that still allows water to soak through.
We're leaning toward organic mulch because in hot weather, it keeps the soil relatively cool. And it holds its moisture better than rock mulches, so we don't have to water as often.
We want the mulch to pretty much reflect the contours of these basins, keep water pooling over the roots. And remember, we planted all these pretty high, so the crown of each plant is just a little bit above the surface of the finished mulch. Okay, that's what we mean by that.
Here.
That's good there.
Now, how's that?
Yeah, just maybe for extra. Perfect.